7, so we'll make a start. Some other people might come in a bit later, but we'll make a start anyway. Before I do anything else, I'll just have to tell you that this thing is being videoed. It's actually not quite live, is that right?
Not quite live.
And eventually it goes to YouTube, so you can enjoy yourself on YouTube. That's right, if you're so inclined. I won't. Okay, welcome and thanks for coming at a very kind of raining and unpleasant night. And the meeting was called for 2 reasons really. The first reason is that as Cowell Greens we wanted to present ourselves and tell people that we are having a sub-branch here now and that in the Cowell a Green Party does exist. The other reason is that there are some pressing issues, pressing not just for the Green Party but for everybody else in this area and wider afield. And for tonight those 2 topics are going to be the TTIP, and I'm using that abbreviation but that will be expanded upon, and almost anything nuclear, and certainly particularly on the Cowell that's of great interest to all of us. And a number of you will already be well informed, but you might want to join the debate and the discussion after that. So for tonight, I would like to introduce two guest speakers. I'm terribly delighted to introduce you to John Finney, MSP of Highlands and Islands, under which we actually resort, certainly as a Green Branch, and Martha Wardrop, who is the Vice Convener for the Scottish Green Party, but she is also, and has been for some years, and mold-breaking Green Councillor in Glasgow, and as such she knows what it's like to be in a minority and make your voice heard. They probably may want to say something about themselves, but I'll introduce you to them now. They will speak for about 20 minutes or what about, then we'll have question and answers, then Martha, and any time left you can field general questions, ask about the party, whatever you want to do. John?
Okay, many thanks. Well, Fesca Marvel Adunia, good evening everyone. My name is John Finney, MSP for the Highlands and Islands. I'm designated as an independent. I want openness and transparency in all forms of government. I tried to get a bill through recently about that, but I've had to jettison it due to low income. So it's important I tell you I'm also a member of the Green Party, but I wasn't elected as such, so I sit as an independent. But, I'm very grateful to the Cowell Green Party for the invitation to come and speak to you tonight about TTIP, TTIP, these 2 lovely abbreviations for Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And my interest in all things is whether government at whatever level act in the interests of their citizens. And it will be my submission to you that any government acting in the interests of its citizens will kick this TTIP well and truly into touch. But what I plan to talk about is what it is, what its proposed purpose is, who says that about it, based on what, and what are the local implications. So it is a trade agreement, and it's presently being negotiated between the European Union and the United States of America. And a few quotes here. It aims at removing trade barriers in a wide range of economic sectors, making it easier to buy and sell goods and services between the EU and the USA. Now, there's a lot of information out there about this, and of course we would all have our preferred sources of information, and what I'm going to do when I speak is to highlight some of the differences that exist between people's understanding and interpretations of the purpose of this. So if I tell you, for instance, that Unite, the Union, who have been very vocal on this, in the World Development Movement, a fine organisation many will be familiar with, they don't quite describe it like this. They tell us that it's ostensibly a free trade agreement which will cover 60% of global GDP, 33% of world trade in goods, and 42% of world trade in services. And as a result of that, it must be apparent to all of us that that will not only impact on the EU and the United States, but will also impact on the rest of the world too. Significantly, they say, and I entirely agree, that it's about increasing the power of multinational investors. These are the big investment companies, the big corporations, the hedge funds. And coupled with that, it's about reducing the regulations that these organisations are faced with. They sum it up as a charter for big business, and importantly, and of great interest as all hope, a threat to democracy. Now I'm going to give you a wee bit of the background to it. It starts in July 2013. The European Commission negotiates on behalf of the European Union, and the United States Trade Representative, USTR, is the main US negotiator. And we're assured that the Commission, which of course isn't an elected body, the Commission will consult with member states throughout this entire process. And if there is an agreement, the Council, European Council and the European Parliament will examine it, approve or reject it, and if member state ratification is likely, I beg your pardon, the issue of there will be aspects that's out with the jurisdiction of the European Commission, and member states will be up to them to decide whether they ratify these particular aspects. It will be done through secondary legislation approved in the UK by the Commons and the Lords. However, if member states do agree to elements of it, that can enter into force before it's actually ratified by national parliaments. So again, you may wish to have a view on the democratic accountability that's at play there. Changes to EU laws, rules or regulations resulting from the agreement will be separately approved by member states in Council and dealt with by the European Parliament. The US will require Congress to approve agreement. Now this is a reserved issue, so there is absolutely zero input for the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament on it as regards either the negotiation or any subsequent ratification. I don't know how reassured you'll be to know that the lead UK Government official, the UK Minister for State for Trade and Investment, is someone called Lord Livingston. I have to be honest and say he's one of the many lords who I knew nothing about, so I had a wee look online yesterday, and it turns out that Lord Livingston was appointed on the 11th of December 2013, and he's a Conservative Lord. It also turns out that he's the former Chief Executive of the BT Group between 2008 and 2013, the Finance Director at Dixon's Group. He worked for 3i plc, whoever they may be, Hilton Group and Bank of America. He seems just the ideal guy to be speaking up for the folk of Cowal, I would have thought. And you know, there are different perspectives on this, and I will always look to people who many will consider honest brokers. So for instance, the War on Want, and I'm going to do a lengthy quote here, when they say, "The aim is to rush through the talks as swiftly as possible with no details entering the public domain, in the hope that they can be concluded before the peoples of Europe and the USA find out the true scale of TTIP threat. Yet these barriers, in inverted commas, are in reality some of the most prized social standards and environmental regulations, such as labour rights, food safety rules, including restrictions on genetically modified crops, regulations on the use of toxic chemicals, digital privacy laws, and even new banking safeguards introduced to prevent a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis. The stakes, in other words, could not be higher." Now, deregulation, of course, will create new markets by opening up the public services and government procurement contracts, the local authority procurement contracts, to competition from transnational corporations, and that will clearly lead to the threat of a wave of privatisations in key sectors such as health and education. And I think during the independence referendum debate, much was said about the National Health Service and the threat to the National Health Service in Scotland as a result of the formula for funding and as a result of changes that take place south of the border and the effect that has on the founding formula. September of this year, the outgoing EU Trade Commissioner, Karel de Gucht, hope I pronounced Mr. Karel's name correct, he said there's a danger TTI will never be agreed. There's a lack of political leadership and there'll be further delays because of the US presidential elections. I don't know that that is the case. I don't know that that is the case. I think that when you have many corporations around the globe having greater power than nation states, sovereign states, then they'll certainly make their influence held. So a brief word on the scope of the negotiations and potential sticking points. As things stand at the moment, tariffs between the EU and the US average about 3%. They're already low, and the TTIP would plan to eliminate them altogether. But actually most of the negotiations not been done about the tariffs, it's been done about other matters. The harmonising of product regulation and standards, So things like labelling, product specifications, sanitary requirements, and clearly we could well be in when we talk about harmonising, we could well be talking about eliminating, and that is a great concern. There is some hope, and our brothers and sisters in France have played a part in some of that hope. In May 2013 they got the audiovisual sector precluded, and that was to allow them to continue to subsidise on the grounds of cultural protection. They rightly are very concerned about the erosion. A US official, whose details I'll spare you, said, well, this could well result in tit-for-tat retaliation from the United States with regard to other matters. Now, as much as the concern is about TTIP, the concern that's been expressed by many is about the dispute resolution mechanism, and I'll give it its Sunday name, which is Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, ISDS. Now, the House of Commons Library tells us this will allow investors to bring proceedings against a foreign government that is party to the treaty, brought under international law, and it will be more certainty that the investor will. It will bring more certainty that the investor will have a claim adjudicated in an impartial manner. Now, in response to a government question, the UK government parliamentary question, the UK government have said it can help create a positive investment climate and promote growth. A positive investment climate and promote growth. War and Want, and again to compare and contrast, they talk most worryingly of all, TTIP seeks to grant foreign investors a new right to sue sovereign governments in front of ad hoc arbitration tribunals for loss of profits resulting from public policy decisions. Now, public policy decisions, of course, are what we know as democracy, and what's being suggested here is clearly an erosion of that. Warren went on to say, this investor-state dispute settlement mechanism effectively elevates transnational capital to a status equivalent to the nation-state itself, and threatens to undermine the most basic principles of democracy in the EU and USA alike. Another good source of comment, George Monbiot, who in relation to that says that while corporations can sue states, there are no corresponding rights for citizens. ISDS is a privatised justice system for global corporations. France has said that it will not support the inclusion of ISDS. Now, of course, it's not all doom and gloom. You have proponents who are prepared to say very, very positive things about that, and both the European Commission and the UK government quote the Centre for Economic Policy Research, who suggest there'll be £100 billion worth of benefits to the EU, 80 billion to US, and 85 billion to the rest of the world. And that from the supply chains to these two giant economies. And of course, this is quite rightly hotly disputed. And the reasons for that dispute are that, as people would well understand, trade between the EU and the US is already well developed. And we've talked about the average tariff being low. And the benefits are clearly, of removing them, are overstated. One of the most worrying benefits, of course, could be the effect of labour costs, because capital will go where labour costs are low. So bringing it very locally, the Scottish NFU, they're very concerned about the different standards that would apply in agriculture between the EU and the US, particularly with regard to the use of growth hormones, which I'm told makes for more efficient production and cheaper meat, and customers do of course go where the price is, and they claim that rules in any trade deal will not allow them to highlight the difference in production methods, which in one way might ameliorate the other effects. And with regard to food, we all consume food. The GM crops are subject to strict regulation by the EU. The EU will not allow meat with growth hormones, and it won't allow something that the US do, and that's to wash chickens in chlorine. Yes, I went too. I didn't like to think too much about that. But apparently, both of these matters are the subject of dispute at the World Trade Organization raised by the US. The EU argues that it's necessary for protection of health, and we would all see that as a priority. Whilst the US calls the ban unscientific and part of a protectionist strategy. So again, you see the language and the use of language, the aggressive use of language, and the disregard for process. Now, there are precedents for some of the concerns that people might have, and Philip Morris, which is a very predatory tobacco American company, and they invoked a 1993 trade agreement with Australia as the basis of a legal move to force a change to their packaging arrangements. Canada is being sued for a moratorium on fracking. But don't worry, a Canadian corporation is suing the El Salvador government, which refused them permission to bore a gold mine on the basis that this would interfere and contaminate water. So they are suing them, and what they're suing them for is £315 million of anticipated lost profits. Now, these are not the only examples. There's 2 examples in Sweden, there's examples in, I beg your pardon, in Switzerland, examples in Uruguay, and example in the Slavic Republic. The NHS, of course, is the main area of concern that people have, and I think it's quite right to have that concern. And again, the House of Commons document says, measures to open up the NHS to competition could be irreversible if the provisions required US companies to be compensated in the event of a policy change. But what we do know, of course, is that Lord Livingston is very keen, along with his Conservative friends, to see the benefits of private capital being, for UK health services, being made to grow elsewhere in the US. The environment, and I'm sure many in this room would place an understandable high priority in the environment. US oil companies, of course, are challenging environmental regulations, such as France's laws against fracking, plus prohibition on genetically modified organisms. And again, I think that's a very topical matter, the fracking issue, because the Green Party, the Scottish Green Party, have proposed a moratorium on fracking, and it's a very clever way of avoiding individual disputes by saying, well, we're not saying never, but not for just now, we'll keep monitoring it. But clearly the US oil companies, which are perfectly happy to be involved in a dispute about the Arctic, and that's the next battleground for us all, as you're aware. My preference is that it would be treated as a UN protectorate like the Antarctic, but I think Exxon and Gazprom and all the rest are very keen to bleed it of what resources it has. There's been a consultation on this is reassuring. There's about 150,000 responses. 50,000 of these were from the UK. But in anything, I quite often look to see who the supporters of a cause are. So this is backed very strongly by a group called Scottish North American Business Council.
Who are they?
I'd never heard of them either, but I have to tell you, they were giving evidence at the Scottish Parliament last week. So I had a wee look online yesterday, and they have the bit about us, and that was written by someone called Ian McMillan, CBI man. They have 7 members. They have 7 members, and I'll tell you who 3 of them are. The CBI, the Institute of Directors, and Morgan Stanley. So that's going to be very impartial and reasoned argument we're going to get from them. So, you know, who lines up behind any cause, I think, is an important indicator of the values that we in this room would place in things. David Cameron at the G20 summit said he would fire rocket boosters up the negotiations. Nicola Sturgeon, and we've all looked to Nicola to bring some presence to bear on some of the matters like fracking and like TTIP. And on the 26th of February 2013, I want to quote this very precisely, speaking at a meeting in Brussels, she said, earlier this month the European Union and the USA announced that they would work to establish a transatlantic trade and investment partnership. The announcement was a reminder of the massive opportunities that European Union membership brings. 2 weeks ago on Twitter, Nicola said, for those asking about TTIP, I share concerns about ISDS, the dispute resolution system, and oppose any inclusion of the NHS. The Scottish Government has made this clear to the UK Government. But by singling out only the NHS. We've all worked out what that also signals. And agreeing to facets of the TTIP will put us in the same position as the US. And the US oil and gas indices are exempt from environmental laws. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Resource Conservation, etc., etc. So I would have hoped for something stronger, and I hope we'll yet see something stronger from the Scottish Government. I have to say that when in response to a statement on a ministerial statement on the National Health Service prompted by a question from the Labour Party, Alec Neil was very strong what he said in relation, but again only in relation to the NHS. So it's drafted in secret, it's drafted by vested interests. I would say it's to the immediate and long-term disadvantage of citizens. Disputes are resolved in private. ISDS overruling nation state. Who says it's good? Why do they say it's good, and based on what? What does it mean for Cowell, for instance? Well, what's under threat, and what we know is under threat, is the National Health Service. We know quality food controls are under threat. We know environmental controls are under threat. And because the capital goes where labour costs are cheap, we know that workers' terms and conditions, very hard fought for workers' terms and conditions, and with that health and safety. And bear in mind we have a UK Prime Minister who's described described wanting to slay the health and safety monster. Loss of democratic accountability through service by the public service has been delivered by contracts. So the proponents are big business, the proponents are led by an unelected Lord. The opponents, and Martha told me at the beginning of the meeting there of a great success for the Green Party in Glasgow City Chambers last week, where a motion was passed, a mould-breaking motion in fact, which got cross-chamber consensus expressing concern about the secrecy aspects of the deal, which I think is a success in itself. So when you've got big business and their lordships on one side, and you've got the Green Party, trade unions and environmentalists on the other, I don't think there should be any dispute where your loyalties lie. I think we need to work very, very swiftly. We need to build up coalitions that are opposed to this. This is in no one's interest other than the elites who already plunder the earth and its resources at the expense of our citizens. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
We would like to have about 20-25 minutes worth of discussion, questions from the floor before we turn to Martha. So open it to you to ask John anything, particularly about TTIP.
Can I say, they always say, when you've ever given any advice about speaking, they never say, never start with an apology. But by coming here and being delighted to speak on this subject, let me reassure you I'm not setting myself up as any expert. I found it a very interesting process, spending some time understanding this, but I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, or we'll find some way of getting an answer to you.
You stated earlier on that some of the governments, some of the companies are suing some governments. How is that possible if this hasn't taken effect yet?
Well, the one I mentioned that's presently being sued relates to a 1993 agreement. Philip Morris in Hong Kong somehow comes into it. There are actually a number of agreements already. This is an all-encompassing, super-duper, large scale. I think Britain, the United Kingdom, has 90-odd agreements, various trade agreements at the moment. What's different is the dispute resolution. I mentioned also the World Trade Organization in the USA. I have to say I don't have a lot of faith in any of these global bodies. I think the US predominates, but that's how it happens at the moment. Okay. Yes.
What I mean, having sort of beginning to read a bit about it and getting more and more anxious as I do, I just fail to understand how the European Council, and I'm a pro-European generally speaking, I hardly believe they're gullible. Why it is that they are entering into anything so wholesale as they do. Have you got any views on that?
Well, I talked about the body who gave evidence at the Parliament last week, and I had a look at the evidence, and what they were talking about was the benefits of the woolen industry in the borders, the cashmere industry, which faces significant tariffs, and this would open up the market for them. Well, that's very good. I think we want to sustain a vibrant knitwear industry in the borders and elsewhere, but not at the expense of everything else, not at the threat of public services, not at the threat of hard for workers' tension.
Be destroyed by it, vice versa.
Indeed. Apparently there's a tariff on slippers, a US tariff. Now, but there you go. It's about money. It's about money, and it's about capitalism. I can't offer you an alternative at the moment, but that's what it's about. It's about that sad state of affairs where a multinational corporation makes a profit of obscene profit of X hundreds of million one year and makes 10 million less the next year, and that's deemed a failure. Business is about profit. I don't have an issue with the butcher, the baker, candlestick maker making the profit. There's the difference between that and obscene profit. And the sums of money we're talking about are obscene. You know, when the top multinationals have more power than most sovereign states.
Questions there?
Yeah, in terms of the EU, is there consensus amongst the heads of state of the EU countries over this, or what's the situation?
No, there doesn't seem to be. There seems to be, the French seem to be taking a very strong position on it. It was a few weeks ago they made the announcement about the ISDS, the dispute resolution system, and they are not going to sign up to that. Now, I think they have whether justified or not, reputation of French have been thrown, have been stubborn. That's great. I hope they stick with that. This will require consensus. I do fear, and this isn't to cast aspersions at any one individual, but if your background is Morgan Stanley, the Bank of America, you're maybe going to think different than if your background is representing low-paid workers in the NHS. And I think that never underestimate the power of these multinational corporations. As a local councillor with planning matters, can I assure you that the Astas of this world, they would compromise anyone. They would compromise anyone. They wouldn't like that, but then I'm not bothered what the retailer, the biggest retailer of handguns across the counter in the US, as Walmart says. But that's the type of people you're dealing. If there's a pound in it, they'll go for it.
Question at the back.
It's maybe I think we should put this into some kind of context. So this is going to be a statement, then a question. The TTIP is not the first round of what's taking place with this. It was first embedded within the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that is almost already active. And New Zealand, as itself, there's still negotiations, but New Zealand in and of itself cannot get access to these negotiations because they are private, and that's the current state of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Monsanto is going to sue Maui because it's part of it's within that region, because it will not allow, for the health it says it will not allow GMOs to be available on Maui. So Maui is being sued by Monsanto. It's the whole Pacific Rim that's involved within this partnership. And it also allows China to access resources in Australia, which is going to allow them to go through the Great Barrier Reef to access the coal fields under the wheat fields in Australia, so that China can get cheap coal to produce the goods for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But we have to connect all the dots here, and a lot of this has to do with the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and anyone that takes a loan from these people. If we, as the UK has, taken a loan from the World Bank, then we are subject to the conditions of the World Bank. And the conditions are that we have to privatise national assets from the World Bank. Any government that comes into power has that agreement from the World Bank. We don't have a choice in that matter. When it comes to negotiations in the EU, we have no choice in that matter, because it's going to be between the EU Council, and the parliamentarians can only advise the Council, they cannot tell them what to do. The Council will make the decision, tell the parliamentarians what's going to take place, and they have to follow through on this. And unless we get 1 million votes in an appeal across Europe, it will not be held, it will not be heard within Parliament. but we have to look at this globally. We have Harper in Canada, we have Abbott in Australia, we've got John Keyes in New Zealand, we've got Cameron in the UK, we've got Merkel in Europe, and these guys are all pro-business and pro-transnationals. The Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic one are just a combination of that process. That was based on the North American Free Trade Agreement way back in the late 80s, 90s, and this is just an extension of that process. What frustrates me is the harmonisation in this, because the harmonisation process that you alluded to comes straight out of the United Nations. And in the United Nations, in 1963, they began a process called Codex Alimentarius. Codex Alimentarius was the harmonisation of food standards across the globe. They are still in discussions on this because of a consumer, the only consumer group actually at the Codex Alimentarius are in there fighting for us and our health. It's the only one. They want conditions on baby formula. They want conditions on what seeds you can grow, the varieties of seeds you can grow, the removal of heritage seeds from stock. This all has to do with the United Nations and the Codex Alimentarius. When you start to link these things in together, and you look at the TTIP and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we have to think bigger in terms of if we're going to tackle these guys. So what's the best way forward?
What a brilliantly succinct question after. You're the guy that should be out here. Can I say, you're absolutely right about the World Bank. There's a tremendous film that the World Development Movement, I think it's the World Development Movement, have about Jamaica, if anyone's seen that. Starts off with people in a sort of luxury section of an international aircraft going into Jamaica for their wonderful holiday, and then it shows behind the scenes and what happened when a loan was granted. I think it's Michael Manford was the president. Yeah, that's it's greed. Fundamentally, it's greed. And my late mother used to have a phrase: "Enough's as good as a feast," and that's all we need. We only need enough, but enough. You know, there's profit and there's obscene profit, and the sums of money we're talking about are ridiculous. It's a big boys' club. It's a big boys' club, and somebody will have heard me use that phrase before. And it is about elites, and elites won't be in this room. They are the bankers, they are the arms dealers, they are the multinationals, and they're public school boys. And it's the same type of person, regardless. You mentioned the gentleman, the president in Australia there, climate change denier. And the treatment of because the patterns of behaviour are the same. If you've disregard for people fleeing extreme poverty or fleeing oppressive regimes as he has, then of course you'll have a disregard for the planet itself. So I don't have an answer for you. You've just highlighted everyone the complexity of the problems and the overlaps, and there is nothing new. Man has been greedy from day one, and they'll continue to be greedy, and this is just another way of locking in that greed. So, sorry, I'm as frustrated as you, by. Yeah.
So the thing about the loan process,
Yes.
how is that process to take place? How does that happen?
You start a petition on the EU.
It is the petition.
It's a petition, yes,
Yeah,
and you start one on the EU website, and I think it's 1 million people to cast a vote.
But I think they've already got 1.5 million
Okay, good.
signatures. I'll give you the website address for it, because it actually unites all the movements against it. But the other thing is, of course, I mean, it is an issue of democracy. You're totally right there. And apart from the TTIP, there's more talk about making the European Council more accountable, and people are beginning to start to talk about citizen initiatives. And that's another strand that people can support, where it is going to be possible for the citizens of the European Union to have a say. If the Council's not doing it, and if the parliaments are weak, then maybe the voters. So that it may be too slow, but it's still worth doing, I think.
Well, like you, I am pro-European because I'm an internationalist first and foremost. But there are frailties about the systems. The Commission is a monstrous beast. The Council is a boys' club, and the Parliament's an appendage, really. And I don't mean that offensive to the many good folk that go there and work very hard there. But it is a very unwieldy operation, and I still think we should have we should have that level of representation. I mean, that may conflict with the notion of having something very local. I think you can have them both, but it's completely out of hand. I mean, we tend to be very compartmentalised in the Parliament with our committees and interests. And for instance, what happened with the Lisbon Treaty and the opt-outs, the criminal justice opt-outs, the justice system opt-outs of the European arrest warrant, the judicial network, without a mention of the difference in Scotland, without any reference to Police Scotland, Crown Office, Procurator, Fiscal Service. Now they're going to be back in, but that was pandering to the rise of UKIP, you know, Johnny Forner can never get it right sort of approach. And there are problems there we have to overcome, and it is going to be citizens. When I talked about, you know, there will be, I think Martha said that Brighton and Hove had also a similar motion. It is to build up, but I have to say, I was meeting someone earlier today who's a very informed gentleman, and we had a very wide-ranging discussion about things. The particular reason, a reason I was in Kowal to meet someone about a public matter, and I mentioned I was here tonight. I said, oh, what's it's about? The gentleman hadn't heard of it, and I'm not being critical of him at all. I'm not being critical, and extremely, because as we heard from More Than One, as we heard from Unite, the more you can keep this quiet, the less likely it is your average citizen is going to say, what the heck's going on here? So it is about raising awareness, and to that extent I think it's been very helpful for the Kowal Green Party to have had tonight's subject as a...
Other questions? Because if not, I'm going to, I'd like to ask, because John, you mentioned the importance of building alliances and making it known. When people know what it's all about, they're instinctively against it. And we know that there are organisations like 38 Degrees, the World Development Movement.
Trade unions.
Trade unions have been very active in doing it. But where do we go from here? Now, particularly, perhaps Martha also can ask us, what role do you see that MSPs like yourself and the Green Party can have in, first of all, making people aware of what TTIP stands for, and perhaps more importantly then what we can do to actually stop it?
Well, we've got these wonderful leaflets here. I think that's very important. I think it would be good to see them in street stalls. I think there is an opportunity that associates itself with the general election, regardless of how the Scottish Green Party decides to, whether it puts up candidates in some areas, doesn't put up candidates, how it approaches it. Because what I would like to see is this being placed in front of every candidate of every other party and say, what is your position on it?
Yeah.
I was at a meeting of the Radical Independence Movement in Inverness on Saturday. We had the 4 Scottish National Party candidates along. I asked them about this, I asked them about fracking, and they all said personally they weren't up for any of that. Well, of course, that's not reflected in the position that's been taken in respect of either of these issues. So it is about street stalls, it is about speaking to people. I was at a good meeting several weeks ago there, and people said what they're going to take from the meeting. And there was this elderly woman, and she wouldn't mind me call elderly. She says, I'm going to get a bundle of leaflets, and I'm going to go around all my neighbours, and I'm going to tell them all about this. And that's actually what we need, because people, it's our nearest and dearest. If everyone is talking about this, because if you have to look at the mainstream media, particularly the print media, it's perhaps very unlikely that Mr. Murdoch's going to have any concerns about this. I think we could almost guarantee that.
It's not
But
been in the media at all.
No, indeed. But we have to get it up there. And if the lever for that is the role that this would play in dismantling the National Health Service, and how impotent the Scottish Government would be with all the new powers that may come. Because this is not just about the Barnett formula, this is about who the nation state is, and it's the UK that would be the signatory, not the component parts thereof. So whatever was agreed by Lord Livingston, or however, I can't see that they're batting strongly for their attention of for the notion of exclusion the NHS. That's not the suggestion. Quite the reverse. It's seen as opportunities. And is that an opportunity for someone who may be a patient? I don't think so. Is that an opportunity to deal with the issues, the challenges for rural communities connected with the provision of NHS services? You know, further north in West Ardnamurchan and Arnisdale, in northwest Sutherland, the challenges are really quite demanding now, and you know, very creative solutions being looked at. A boat to, you know, GP going about by boat between the various places from Southwest Skye to the Inner Isles. Real challenges. But what we do know from the experience, for instance, of privatisation or outsourcing some of the work with councils do, particularly if you think of home care, and if I can be parochial and say the town where I live, Inverness, the private companies were very interested in that. That's great. My old council ward, dense social housing, great. But guess what? They weren't interested in rural Inverness Shire. Weren't interested in rural Inverness Shire. I've been involved in representing people in very remote areas of Argyll too. The challenges of getting people in these terms and conditions. And of course it's compounded, because when you go to renew the contract and you have the comparator, so I'll give you an actual example, the Dalwhinnie area. So the Badenoch area was covered because there was houses there. The company said, we're not sending someone down there. The statutory obligation remained with the council to deliver that care. They did so, but if you go to compare any figures at any future rate, it's going to look ridiculous. You know, so it's, to me, I don't even want that to be a playing field. It's not about having a level playing field. I want the public service to deliver vital public services and remove any suggestion of profit motive. So whether that's prisons, schools, and most certainly our health service.
Are there any other questions on TTIP? I'm sure this is something we will continue to return to as a Scottish Green Party in Cowal. But unless there are other questions for John, perhaps we can just show our appreciation again, and thank you very much. I think Mariah's already introduced Martha and the work you do on the Glasgow Council, so Martha Woodruff.
Hi, good evening everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and I'm delighted that you've been able to host this meeting this evening. I have been a councillor since 2007 at Glasgow City Council and I think it's helpful to hear John speak about the TTIP. I say it's quite topical for us. We had a motion last week agreeing with the concerns that have been raised by John amongst local councillors. So I would encourage you also to discuss it with your local councillors for this area. Obviously fishing and farming, the food industry here, as well as your local public services are under threat, and it's worth sort of mentioning to them your concerns about TTIP as well, and also we raise it through the community councils. As a councillor I go to all the community councils in my area and I take a great interest in what their concerns are, so if you are engaged with the community councils it's worth mentioning that as well. But I've been active as a peace campaigner and campaigning against Trident nuclear weapons. I've been involved in the Scottish CND and I'm sure I thought I would share my concerns with you this evening and see what we can take forward. Obviously there's been a big year, the talk of Future Scotland, and many of us had hoped that we would be seeing the end of Trident replacement and we would be looking to a more peaceful, prosperous future without nuclear weapons, but we're not there yet. We've still got a lot of work to do. But I think obviously since the results of the independence referendum we've seen further UK government announcements, investment in Vaseline nuclear submarines and the base there. Particular concern is the focus now of the UK government on making Vaseline the main submarine base for the future. And for many of you, I'm sure you'll feel that you haven't been engaged in the discussions about this, you haven't been properly consulted, and they're going ahead and without taking on board any of your questions and concerns. Vaseline is currently the base for all the Trident nuclear armed submarines, and it's home to a growing fleet of Astute class submarines which are also nuclear powered. So the MOD is just going ahead with this plan, but the concern I think is the fact that they're going to put more waste into the Gairloch as the number of nuclear submarines based rises from 5 potentially to 14 by 2019. And in the last month the MOD is applying for planning permission for a major new radioactive waste treatment plant, and this new plant would be housed in a 2-storey building designed to last for 50 years. And if the planning permission is given, construction we expect to begin in January 2016 and finished in April 2018. So Argyll and Bute Council been told the new facilities to treat and dispose of solid and liquid radioactive waste from reactors that drive the submarines. And the waste comes from the submarine reactors, includes radioactive cobalt-60 and tritium, I think it is. The MOD also wants to keep emitting this titanium gas to the atmosphere from the nuclear weapons stored at Coalport on Loch Long, and annual emissions would have doubled between 2008 and 2012, and are expected to rise with the introduction of the upgraded warhead designs. So there's a growing concern about radioactive waste in the area, and this new facility only adds to our concerns about nuclear submarines. And proposals would also shift some submarine work to Coalport, which also mean more radioactive waste being transported by road between the two bases. So there's a risk of accidents on the road, potentially. The amount of solid waste to be treated and disposed of near Sellafield in Cumbria is also due to increase. So there's effects across the UK, and you're not the only community living in the shadow of nuclear waste problems. The MODs are obviously going to dismiss any concerns and say that they will comply with authorised limits, and there obviously is no concerns, and Greens have been calling for SEPA and Scottish Government to crack down on the pollution. So alongside this, we've seen also the UK Government agree to a £37 million deal with the US Government for a dozen huge new Trident missile launchers. And this deal comes more than a year before the UK Parliament is due to decide whether nuclear weapons system will be renewed. So we've got a US defence contractor, General Dynamics. They're going to make 12 launch tubes for a UK submarine that could start to replace those currently on the Clyde in the next decade. But this contract with the US Navy will supply up to a total of 48 missile tubes for 4 new UK nuclear submarines, at a time when the UK Parliament has actually not made the decision on whether we go ahead with this Trident replacement or not. So there's a big question over the democratic process here, and the renewal of these weapons, I understood, was still to be decided after the next general election. And the Greens were arguing that the UK government's basically preempted a democratic decision and gone ahead with this £375 million bill, when we all know that austerity is really creating a lot more hardship across the country, and we all want the money to be spent on protecting our health and our public services and protecting the most vulnerable, rather than funding more nuclear weapons. So the campaign goes on through the Green Party to stand up and highlight concerns about the way that we're progressing with this deal for these 12 missile launch tubes contract, and holding the UK government to account, but also through obviously the general election, the lead up to the general election. What's been highlighted is any candidates putting themselves forward are asked about what they're going to do to oppose investment in nuclear submarines, and we have to challenge them through taking part in the Scrap Trident Coalition. It's one way. We've seen a successful gathering at Faslane in the last couple of weeks. There was the greatest number of people there that I've ever seen, certainly for the last decade. So there were over 1,500 people there, and we've got further plans for next spring with a great big gathering in Glasgow on the 28th of March and a big blockade at Faslane on the 13th of April. So I think with yourselves and others across the peace movement gathering together, we can speak strongly and argue the case against the continuing disregard for local people's opinion, but also Scottish opinion is against nuclear weapons, and we don't want this contract to continue. We want a halt to the investment in Basleyan nuclear submarines, and we've seen through the Vienna conference that was held as well in the last few weeks as well. We've seen a gathering of representatives from countries who want to ban nuclear weapons. We had representatives from Scottish Government, Scottish Civil Society supporting a ban. The Australians have, given their support to end nuclear weapons at this conference, along with 44 other states. So we've got a huge number of people active across Europe, across the world, that we can work with to stop nuclear weapons. I think the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons is becoming much clearer. I don't know if you've been following all the campaigning that's been going on through ICAN, but it's an international movement now that's developing, and we've got a lot more opportunities working globally, linking in with other countries to stop nuclear weapons. Next year as well is the 70th anniversary of the atomic bombs being dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I'm not sure if you've been involved in any special memorial events, but they're often a chance to raise awareness amongst the general public about the impact of nuclear weapons, and that's sort of in August time. So I think it would be fitting to link in with any memorials that are taking place. So obviously the biggest impact has been in Japan and Australia, Kazakhstan, and the Marshall Islands are currently taking a court case against the impact of nuclear weapons testing. So that the outcome of that will be in March, and there'll be a lot of opportunities through the media as well to link in with that and speak out within your local groups, highlight the case of the Marshall Islands and what they're doing to campaign against nuclear weapons. I think through working together with other activities linked to ICAN, the Scottish campaign for nuclear disarmament and scrap Trident, we can all support this. There is a concern as well, obviously, about nuclear energy, and we continue to have to stand against nuclear energy investment. We've seen a lot more focus on fracking and concerns about the rollout of licences across the UK for fracking, but we can't dismiss the dangers of nuclear energy as well. And we have to take note of a report that was published at the weekend where local authorities found that nuclear power stations across the UK have been unexpectedly shut down 20 times a year because of faults, cracks, seaweed and other problems, sparking fears that they can't keep the lights on. So analysis is that the 15 reactors have had 62 unplanned shutdowns in the last 3 years, and I think the main problem has been within Torness in East Lothian. It was closed in May and November 2013 due to seaweed clogging up the filters. So it's a report by Pete Roach, which many of you will have heard of. The work that he's done has really focused local authorities on the urgent concerns of the nuclear power generate. We can't rely on them to power our economy and provide energy for our homes. They're a danger as well to the local populations living near them. And Alison Johnson has, in her role on the Economy and Energy Committee, expressed disappointment that the Scottish ministers are failing to take a tougher approach to nuclear power. She's asked for issues of safety to be highlighted, especially to do with the cracks within the reactors at Hunterston. The cracks are important because we need to challenge the fact that the public has no say in the periodic safety reviews and lifetime extensions granted to our nuclear plants. So we're relying on the Scottish Government really to take action against the companies running the EDF and how they're running these plants. The international law says extensions require public consultation and must compare the potential impact of extending a reactor with supplying energy from alternative sources such as renewable energy. So we have to redouble our efforts and focus as a Scottish Green Party on investment in renewables, particularly at this time in supporting the wind, wave, hydroelectric investments that are needed. We've got to invest in a long-term sustainable energy future and move away from nuclear. Obviously within my role as a local councillor, I'm part of a nuclear-free local authorities and Mayors for Peace, and also support peace education within schools. So I think there's opportunities for you as a local community to raise awareness, working with local schools, working to support renewable energy projects in the community. I'm not sure if you have any locally that you could sort of give more backing to. Also work within the local sort of landowners and work together to look at community-owned energy projects, and I'd be interested to hear about them. So I hope you'll come back to me with lots of questions. Thank you.
I would like to invite some questions, but I'm going to abuse my position by making a comment first, because I had a very interesting exchange of emails with our MP, Alan Reid, about this issue of the tubes which have been ordered for the Trident replacement, even though we haven't agreed to that Trident replacement. And I'm sure some of you have seen this, that the tubes are actually, they contain 12 actual launching sites each. There are 4 of them, so there are 48. But the UK government's already agreed, as part of a cost cutting, to only actually use 8. So what are the other 4? What's going to happen to the 4 which we're paying for? They're going to be filled with ballast. Now, what sort of waste of money is it to spend millions of pounds on a nuclear weapon launching tube and then fill it with ballast? When I challenged Alan Reid, our MP, on some of this, he said, but of course it brings in lots of jobs. But they're being built by General Dynamics in America. So there are so many holes in this argument. But please, questions and comments from the floor. Go ahead.
What would be the impact of road blockades, or even across the Clyde blockades with ships? I mean, if you were living in France, that's what they do. We sit back and we talk about somebody else doing this. So why can't we put a road blockade up and stop these convoys going up and down our roads?
Yeah, so they're obviously...
It's civil disobedience, isn't it?
Yeah, there's are you part of Nuke Watch?
Pardon?
Are you part of Nuke Watch?
No.
So there is a group called Nuke Watch who observe the convoys going up and down from Burnerfield and Aldermaston to Faslane and Coalport. So
Facebook does it too.
you can, so you can sign up to link in with Nuke Watch if you were really concerned and wanted to get involved in roadblocks. That's what they do.
Really? And what about a blockade across the Clyde?
That'd be good.
Suggest it to them. I'm sure they'd be good.
Yes. Could ballast the old ferry. I mean, you know, okay, so maybe it's a bit far-fetched, but we do talk an awful lot about things like that. Other countries don't talk about things like that, they do. You know, and
it's not far-fetched, it's been done before. It was done in the 90s, 1980s and 1990s.
oh, I know, I was there, I was lifted by the police.
Exactly.
It has to be done again. There's too many groups talking about everything, about what you're talking about and what you're talking about. There's never any real proactive stuff, or doesn't appear to be.
Well, you've obviously got lots of stories to share, and maybe there's a new generation of activists coming through now, especially, you know, at the Faslane demo. There was loads of new people, young people who'd never been to Faslane before. There's a lot of, you know, families as well more interested now who've got active involved in interested in what's been happening to nuclear weapons. So hopefully, you know, you
Even
could
America
encourage
would
you know, other people. I don't know, what age were you when you were involved in that?
From 16 onwards.
Yeah. So I think it's worth organising a special get together to show the Nuke Watch of a film that you could maybe put on show, have a public meeting, bring people together to show the Nuke Watch film about the convoys, talk about your experiences, what you got up to, highlight some of the actions that can take place, certainly support the blockade on the 13th of April. There will be training planned in the weekend just before. So it is important to get involved just now, because there's, as I say, there's a lot of opportunities to get new people involved at the moment.
All right.
I'll look up Nuke Watch then.
All right, and then there.
It's not a question; it's a suggestion because of ICANN. In the 80s, there was a group called the Pacific Network, and 2 women from the Pacific came and talked about what had happened to the Marshall Islands after war, and that could easily have happened in US, except the government decided to go to Pacific instead. And so is it time again to bring people over from the Marshall Islands to talk throughout Scotland specifically? And could the Green Party be involved in doing that?
Yeah, so I think the Marshall Islands spoke at the Vienna conference, and there will be online video footage from the Vienna conference highlighting their court case. It's a useful suggestion. I'm not sure what can be done. Maybe just it would need to be through ICANN. We could discuss it through ICANN. I could feed it back into Scottish Green Party. Certainly the Scottish Parliament has hosted events previously as well on this matter. There's a Cross Party working group that, you know, that does meet to talk about these issues, and the case of the Marshall Islands probably be of an interest to the First Minister herself, and on a cross-party basis, but there'd be probably quite a willingness to support what they're doing. So I think it's something to take back, maybe John will take back,
Yes,
to find out more about it and what they're
I'm looking to see what's been done specifically on the Marshall Islands. We know.
They could be brought through. There's obviously a wider peace movement across Europe.
Yeah.
We could be seeing what else can be done to share their story. Okay.
All right.
Well, I mean, the more you think about it, you can also discover these links between these 2 major issues. I mean, if they're bringing up the whole blooming submarine fleet up to Scotland and these lunatic orders for launchers, even if future independent Scotland would like to get rid of that, it could be severely hampered by the existence of the TTIP, could it not? And Scotland could be taken, I mean, could be demolished for these kangaroo courts financially, just for wanting to get rid of it legitimately, but once already here. And that's not at all airy-fairy, is it? I mean, that could happen. I mean, you know.
Well, I think the point is very relevant. I think there is a tipping point where there is public action, and it's been a month in France a number of years ago there, and they have a very honourable habit of demonstrating. I was in Paris one day and there was this demonstration, and I said to someone, what's that? Well, that's the demonstration about the immigrants. That happens every Wednesday, and you know, and it's a different approach that is taken. There will be a tipping point, and the tipping point may well be something like, you know, if profit's going to trump people's interest. What I think concerns me is that people have said Trident's too big. You know, it's too big an issue, it's not going to happen. Well, it's 1.43 billion was spent on early design already. It's an obscene sum of money. We must, you know, I like to use the term, people say weapons of mass destruction. Someone said to me, don't call them that, call them what they are, weapons of widespread, indiscriminate civilian slaughter, because that's what they are. You know, and we just need to, and I asked a whole series of questions about, parliamentary questions about whether any exemption had been given to the nuclear convoys regarding emergency planning, road traffic law, because a lot of the vehicles are heaps. They break down. They have, So there are challenges. Just on the way down here today, Dunrays had its clean-up period put back to 2029. Well, and the rest, I think, and of course there's the issue of transportation of fuel there. We wanted to involve with Highlands Against Nuclear Transport. They have it in trains, it goes through the centre of Inverness, goes through various urban areas. They had the idea that put it by boat. And then of course we had the boat that off the east coast of Sutherland fairly recently in the storm, if you recall. Yeah. No, we need to keep at it, you're absolutely right.
I think we do. Stop talking and do something.
I think through the campaign, like the gathering at Faslane recently, there were buses from all over Scotland, and I know it was maybe difficult for yourselves to get over there, but I think it's important to link in with the Scrap Trident Coalition. It is cross-party, it involves the Scottish Green Party, but a range of other groups concerned about nuclear weapons, and obviously radioactive waste is there's obviously joint work that can be done. We're all concerned about the movement and transportation of radioactive waste on our Scottish roads, and the dangers that brings. So obviously you've got a lot of experience from work, living here in the shadow of Faslane, and linking up with younger people and speaking to other groups in the community about your concerns is important.
Do we have in the Parliament, European Parliament, our human rights, can we not claim that they're being devalued, that we're at risk? I mean, other people claim their human rights are being devalued, much less than having a nuclear weapon storage and things sitting on their doorstep.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Scotland has said for a long, long time we don't want the weapons here, and yet from Westminster they are making us take them. What about our human rights?
Exactly.
Could we look at that?
I'm awaiting an answer to a letter I've written to European Parliament, and I'm waiting for an answer, because I really do feel as if my human rights are being compromised.
So at the Vienna conference, that's what that was a purpose really, to bring all the countries together who are concerned about humanitarian impact and the human impact of people's human rights of nuclear weapons, talking about the mass slaughter, indiscriminate killing, that and the fact that there's been evidence from what happened when they dropped the bombs in Japan, also from the Marshall Islands, people's own personal experiences and the destruction that's taken place. So the countries like Scotland, I think the Scottish representatives have stood up and argued what you've said about living in the humanitarian experiences. You're obviously living in the shadow of this all your lives, and other countries are, along with Scotland, are raising concerns. So we've now got a much broader movement of representatives from across the world determined to ban nuclear weapons, like the banned chemical weapons. So I think there's got a lot more opportunity now than there ever has been, and through the internet and new technology and much more, people are much better connected. So ICAN, if you follow ICAN, you go online there and see there'll be reports from the Vienna conference, all the different speakers there, and all the countries involved: Austria, Bangladesh, Brazil, Brunei, Chad, Colombia, Congo, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, Ghana, Guatemala, Jamaica, Jordan, Kenya, Libya, Malawi, Mexico, South Africa, Switzerland, Thailand, Uganda, Venezuela, Zambia,
but none of these countries have these weapons imposed on them.
No, they don't.
We don't want them, and yet we have to have them.
And on another level,
so they've been waiting
Can
on
I say
them.
what this is about? What it's about is the non-nuclear countries taking the nuclear countries to court on the grounds of humanitarian reasons and also climate challenge, because any detonation of nuclear weapons would create such a change in climate that we would, there's now even greater reason and more reason, and the logic of that to me is like the logic of 784 in the 80s, when in fact we were saying a few people own all the wealth, and that's what needs to change. The majority of countries in the world don't have nuclear weapons.
No, it's only about 9 or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
On another level,
So
totally
they're coming together to say we are not going to have them.
On this
on a
issue-
different level,
Sorry.
apart from the humanitarian thing, I mean, I really do feel as if I'm being compromised coming that there. And I feel my family are and what have you, but on another level, we don't want it, and like that lady says, we've never wanted it. Why are we not being compensated for having it there? Nobody else in the UK wants it, so then Scotland should be compensated for having it here. I mean, money's not going to help us feel better about it, but we should have some kind of compensation for having it here. Nobody else wants it.
Like Murrell and Salib and Argentini, and we look every morning, I look over the water and we see the Coalport nuclear weapons base, and it really is literally staring in the face. On the issue that you raised about activism, when in the 80s, and I lived in England, and I was part of CND, and I was part of those big demonstrations that some of you may remember about cruise missiles, and there was mass activism in those days, and it's been eroded by Thatcherism and the whole depression of the last 20, 30 years. And it's very hard to have that level of activism. But it seems to me that what's happened in Scotland the last 12 months with the referendum has kind of reignited popular interest in politics. And perhaps we can now look to having that kind of mass involvement and direct civil disobedience. But people have forgotten about that. I don't know what.
I don't think in Cowell it's ever gone away. We had the Americans, sorry. And we lived in Culmun and had to look out. We had a beautiful house, beautiful garden, blah blah, and yet we had to look out on that horrible monstrosity and everything it represented. And nobody asked us if we wanted it there, it just came. And then it just went, but left all the detritus behind. I mean, in Cowell, the nuclear thing has never gone away. People have got older and they've had other things in their lives to do. But I don't think that should be a reason for us not being compensated and not having our human rights addressed.
Right.
Well, I totally agree with that. No, absolutely. And I think, whether we like it or not, that needs the doing of some groundwork again. I mean, I'm as culpable as everybody else. I wanted to go to Faslane 10 days ago, and I was told there was a bus going from Dunoon, and then I was told, no, there wasn't a bus going from Dunoon, and that's nobody's fault. But in the end, I ended up not going, which is not.
But you're aware, that's
Yeah, but that's not particularly brilliant. What I would like to come from this meeting, because I hate meetings that
don't do anything,
don't do anything, is that at least, and we have a base that we can use for the time being in the Ford shop, that we set up 2 groups of people that can be interest based, or you can be a member of both, and you don't have to be a member of the Green Party either. One group that starts doing work on TTIP, starting asking the council for information, contacting the trade unions. Whatever that working group finds out. Well, that's the freedom of information.
Absolutely.
You've got to start somewhere. That starts doing work on that. Gets in touch with the health board, as well. But nonetheless, saying, what the implications might be. You've got to start somewhere.
Well, I've written to European Parliament about my human rights. I'm still a month later waiting for an answer. We'll see what happens. But I'm not going to let it go. I've had enough now. I really have had enough. If it means swimming back and forward over there 20 times a day when a nuclear sun comes, I will.
You're glowing in the dark.
Are you suggesting we set up a kind of Cowell anti-TTIP group and a sort of
and the Cowell anti-nuclear group, so that people can get involved? For example, you can take the TTIP leaflet to a street stall, but that's not the best of places.
And as you say, the forward shop's the place to go. I mean,
yeah. Just let me finish. Because that's not the best of places. I mean, you don't say to people who are shopping and passing, what about TTIP? I mean, there has to be a context. So if they can come somewhere to meet and join and explore, that's one thing.
There are a couple other people. There's a lady just with the purple hat, if you don't mind me. You wanted to say something before.
Sorry. No, I was just thinking that I believe America spends billions on war. You know, it's really in debt because of the billions it spends on war. So I kind of get the feeling that TTIP is a way of imperialism, whatever you call it. You know, they're trying to get out of their mess in their own country. You know, so they're concentrating. You know, on UK. I mean, the bases they have around the world. Well, you know, they obviously have to use them for imperialistic kind of methods. So I imagine they're trying to get out of that war debt, you know, in other ways, you know, by using, I don't know, perhaps I'm wrong, but, you know, using this TTIP, you know, perhaps, I don't know. I mean,
I think they're lining their own pockets.
Yeah.
I think I comes into it, definitely.
Was there some? Thank you. Was there somebody, Alistair?
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't like meetings where nothing gets kind of done. The issue. There's two issues for me. One's a nuclear weaponry, and the other one's nuclear power. And I think nuclear power one we can pretty well. That's a bigger issue, and we can get organised around that. But when it comes to nuclear power, there's an issue that you address, and that's localised power production or community power. It's something that I looked into last year quite strongly, and I approached the Forestry Commission on the residuals offers on land that had been set aside for power production, either by wind or by hydro, for companies, 4 companies, not one of them Scottish. The grid is owned by a French company, which just it just blows my mind. And those contracts were created by Mike Russell when he was Environment Minister. And I still want to know is why communities weren't allowed that first bite of the cherry. Why couldn't we have created a Cowell Power Company, produce power locally to the grid, but as us, as the shareholders or as a co-op or as an interested business, to take this forward. So I proposed this Cowell Power Company to the Dunoon Community Council in about November, December 2013. And I didn't hear anything about it, and I was told, go and do it yourself if you're that interested. So I did. And the problem, the thing about it is that we have to have a source of power that can compete with nuclear and that can replace nuclear. Without being able to do that, then we're going to be chasing a lot of stuff down. But there is a power available to do so, and it's called hydroxy. And it comes from water, and it's passing an electric charge through water, capturing the gas, and using that flame to boil water. Just the same way as you just immerse the rods into the water, it makes a steam. So you got a double chamber boil process going on. It's was it fresh water reactor stuff? I'll be quick. I'll be quick because I need to, because if we are going to tackle nuclear energy, then we have to in Cowell we have to start doing something here and local that can be replicated out. And I'd like to see somewhere along the lines a Cowell Power Company get created so that we can actually show this and create a working site.
The reason I wanted to cover an important point was that some of us, Dennis, I can see here from Ardentini, have been involved in local hydropower schemes. It has been very difficult, and there have been a number of blocks. I wonder if John's got something to add.
Yes, can I very quickly make a comment on the lady in front of you who talked. Arms trade's a brilliant trade, absolutely. It's really good for money. If you can, and the term pork barrel politics, of course, which underpins a lot of the philosophy in voting in the United States, if you can get the public to pay you for armaments to blow the living daylights of somewhere, and then you can get public money to pay you to reinstate it, that's the perfect circle. So you're Halliburtons of this world. And but of course, ideally, if you can have that theatre of conflict away from your home territory, and Obama, was it a few months ago, talked about investing, was it 500 million or billion, some obscene sum anyway, on it's going to be reinvested in the war on terror. The war on terror is that thing that George Bush said to you. You remember, you're either with me or you're with the terrorists. Well, I'm with neither of you, and I think most folk are with neither, you know. But it's actually really, really good for business. And I asked, and I think it's, I'm looking for my briefcase, I don't know why, because I know I've left it in the office. I managed to secure a document the Scottish Enterprise had paid for a consultant to do about the arms industry in Scotland. I'd asked some questions about that, and it was very challenging to get information. And I tried different lateral approaches. I asked questions about emergency planning. I said, are you happy that you are, I asked them where they knew of premises that were used in the development, production and sale of armaments, and they said they don't hold that record centrally. So I then asked them about emergency planning. Are you content that every step's in place? Yes. Well, if you don't know where you manufacture arms, how can it be? You know? But I got this document and they sent it to me, and it looked really good. I don't know if any of you have seen it, if I've spoken at other meetings. First 2 pages looked okay, and then they're redacted in bright yellow. Bright yellow. There was to be no doubt you are not getting this information. So the arms trade's alive and kicking in Scotland too, and you need only see how some of my colleagues react to the knowledge that there are manufacturing places in their constituency. So yeah, it's a difficult one to deal with. As regards power, I'm sort of a fairly old-fashioned guy. I like the idea of nationalising these companies, but people say, no, you can't. Lots of restraints in that. So the suggestion, and I've heard this from Patrick, is you actually set up something in opposition to it. Now there are moves, and I was speaking with someone a fortnight ago, and there are moves that may be decided upon this week, where groups can come together, and that group may be a community, maybe a geographic community, it may be a community of interests.
Community Empowerment Bill.
Sorry? Well, the Community Empowerment Bill might be a route to that. That's not precisely what I'm talking about. There's a decision going to be taken this week, I understand, on a matter which I was told was confidential, so I'm not being mysterious because I don't have much confidential information. And if I do, I normally tell folk anyway because it's from officialdom, but this actually was... people need to look at these things. You're right, hydropower is... the big schemes are done, they're done, and they're challenging environmentally anyway. But the community schemes, and there's one, can you see there's one in Soonard, I know, that's seeking a lot of support. That's the way to do it. I was in Orkney a few months ago, and I was speaking to a gentleman who was involved in community development companies, and one of the challenges is that the infrastructure of is designed to take power out from the polluting generating centre to the periphery. So the wherewithal isn't there to take the, because it gets smaller as you go out, it hasn't got the wherewithal. So, of course, funnily enough, the big companies, wind turbines are switched on in Orkney, but the community ones, there was a challenge with that. But what they were going to do, the community development company, they were going to change they were going to use the wind power to create heat, and they were going to have hot houses. Set up a company and employ 2 people. Now, 2 people is not a large number of people, but if you're a small island in Orkney, 2 people having gainful employment and something like that is really, really good. And I learnt at that occasion that they do that in Iceland. They grow pineapples and bananas in Iceland. I don't think that's a challenge for Orkney, maybe. Maybe the citrus fruits. But I think we have to be creative in the way, you know, because I hear people say they aren't Scottish companies. Well, what companies are they? Are they Spanish? Are they Australian? Or, because they're a mixture. That's capitalism, you know. The days of the, you know, the idea, you know, my late mother going to the hydro and everyone talked about the hydro, and it, you know, because people knew folk who worked there, it was a direct employer, hydro folk had houses, it was a community thing. Now it's all City of London. So I think community is the answer. Smaller is best, and the cumulative effect of all these is the... but hopefully this community of interest rather than a geographic community will be a story that will be out shortly, and that, hopefully that will cheer you.
Can I just talk about my experience in Glasgow and looking at energy, renewable energy projects, and and say that there should be a local development plan for this area. There should be policy relating to supporting renewable energy within your local plan. There should be a commitment to reduce carbon emissions. There should be a commitment to create local jobs. And there should be public land that's available to be developed.
Yes.
So you've got the ideal ingredients here to make a really good, you know, community energy project. If you connect, but the thing that's happened is in Glasgow is looking at not connecting to the grid, because connecting to the grid doesn't give you the funds. It's not economic. So it's like everything now, I have to, as a councillor, ask officers, what's the business case for this? Does it stack up financially? And obviously any community project now has to have a business plan. You have to all your funders all lined up. But through the Climate Challenge Fund, which was led by Green MSPs, we've seen a range of projects develop from a feasibility study stage. Certainly in Glasgow, there's been a lot more projects developed around carbon emissions, reducing carbon emissions, looking at energy efficient homes. So there's opportunities through PV. I don't know how many houses have been supported through PV, but also looking at district heating projects. There's now a whole plan across Glasgow to develop district heating. So we are looking at ground source heat pumps. We've got one turbine at the moment that's council owned, but we're looking to do more. We've done a renewables map, so they've identified sites which are most suitable for renewable energy projects. So I think I would be linking in to speak to others who've got experience of renewable energy projects and getting some advice through. There must be someone in the council who has a remit to support local economic development and look at energy efficiency.
You want to see your faces with
But that's their job. That's what they're going to do.
Thank you very much for your advice. It's something I've looked into quite strongly, because we have at the moment the PNE wind coming from Germany to try and put a wind farm at the site. Where I know about the local area plan, I know the stacks of the wind farm. I'm not talking about wind. I'm not talking about hydro. This is a way of creating energy using water that isn't out there yet. It's highly efficient. The waste product is water. So your capital costs are going to be your carbon. It's going to be your carbon costs and your capital costs. Your production costs are minimal because it's a circular system within a system, which is why I need money to go out there and build the thing.
Council and ask for a loan.
The council won't even sign off a letter of support.
Yeah.
But we don't challenge the council enough. Ask them here
Yes.
and ask them
I
those
think we need to
questions.
pursue it further.
We don't.
You need to get more advice and look at other projects of a similar kind.
I'm a member of Community Energy Scotland.
Yes.
I've been at their conferences. I have all the documentation. I know the licenses transmit, to generate, to the quick licenses they're trying to look at in London at the minute. But actually, there's from a generator to consumer license, which is probably what we would actually look for locally. But that's a separate section.
There's no doubt Argyll has a huge potential for different renewable energy.
Absolutely.
And a whole mix of different things. The council doesn't support it, and unfortunately the whole financial incentives aren't really there. I'm just thinking about the time. Some people have to get ferries, some people have long drives on dark country roads. I'm thinking about whether there are other contributions from the floor. And perhaps it's a time to say not only to talk about TTIP and nuclear weapons, nuclear power, if there are other questions or comments generally about Scottish politics or the Green Party, this is, if you haven't come across the Green Party before, this is a chance to talk about what we're doing. Muriel.
Well, there's just one thing that is a possibility, and I think we're already agreed on, and that is in fact to get the first Green councillor on the local council.
And the community councils as well.
Please do come and join us. Please.
Definitely. community councils, please.
Can I say there was research done recently there, and you'll have seen it published, and that shows that when people are presented with a full range of policies, it's Green Party policies that appeal to them most. So you are pushing at an open door with that, and I'd certainly, in my present capacity or whatever future capacity I have, would be very happy to help that, because I think, you know, I speak as a former councillor, the councils get a hard time of it. Some of them deserve it more than others, but it's absolutely vital. All the vital services, your child's education, your vulnerable people's well-being, older people's care, are all dealt with by the council, and it is where local issues can matter. And I think it would be really good to see a whole range of Green councillors. We've seen that where they're small in number, they're powerful in endeavour, and as the results with the TTIP thing suggests. So I'll certainly do anything I can to support that here or elsewhere.
I think if we get onto the subject of Argyll and Bute Council and its shortcomings, we'll be here for a long time. But Mariah and then the lady there. Mariah, you wanted to?
Again, I'm mindful of Martha's time as well, but just to bring you up to speed, somebody who said something about Green councillors. The Argyll Greens are a sub-branch of the Highlands and Islands, but we are striving to become an independent branch. We discussed amongst the Argyll Greens what our position would be on the forthcoming national elections. And for reasons of expediency and being practical about it and time span and perhaps not being able to have a ready-made candidate, we decided not to stand a Green candidate for the national elections. However, there is an interest in amongst the Green Party members of standing for local council and of course later on, earlier on, for Holyrood as well. So as from January, February, across Argyll, we're hoping to have information sessions if one is vaguely interested, so that you can discuss whether or not you would like to stand, and then do training and education sessions. So do approach us if you even have the vaguest interest, because yes, unless we do it ourselves, it ain't going to happen.
So there are...
It was something I've spoken to Mariah before the meeting. It was one of the concerns I think I'd heard about was allotments.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Alistair.
So I had a similar concern before I was a Green councillor, and I'd heard Edinburgh had an allotment strategy.
Yes.
And I thought, well, why hasn't Glasgow got an allotment strategy? So in my campaign newsletter before I got elected, I said, Green councillor supports allotment strategy. So I got elected, and we campaigned in the council, and we now have an allotment strategy.
Yes.
So I think I would encourage you, it's where you see issues with the council, gaps in services, concerns that aren't being addressed properly, things like allotments is a great campaign to have. It's statutory, there's a lot of discussion around the Community Empowerment Bill at the moment, around the future of allotments. It's really topical. The council has land, we know from what you've said.
We just won't tell us where it is.
So, it's just about working together, taking forward.
We're trying to have a community buyout at the moment.
But all you need is a
fantastic thing, and it's got allotments and everything. And do you think the council will even listen? No. Will they answer the emails? No. And now we're having to do all sorts of things. We're taking to the streets, everybody.
Yes,
on Wednesday night, and just to musicians and singers just to make
an example. It can be done.
Film society.
We just all have to work together and keep going.
An allotments association in 2005. It's a long story.
Alistair has come to our Green Party meeting and has begun to explain the complexities of the allotment situation, and it is something we are wanting to pursue. I'm afraid there's just not time to talk about it right now, but the lady here has been wanting to make a contribution.
It's just that I believe Glasgow City Council is becoming a cooperative council, is that right?
Yes, as a cooperative council, we've set up a cooperative fund. It is the Labour administration that's led on this, but obviously it sits very well with our green way of thinking and supporting.
Because I'm from London and my local borough has just become a cooperative council last year, and I think they're getting quite together on a lot of things, you know. It's quite interesting what you talked about allotment, bringing up allotment strategy, because I might take that out with them because it's a real problem in London, you know, allotments, yeah.
Alistair is the person to talk about this. I am very aware of time, and very particularly this house again. Unless there are any other pressing, we have a number of suggestions about setting up a local group like TTIP, about setting up a local CND kind of, with a view to actually doing something.
I'm quite happy to convene a TTIP working party if anybody's interested in that. And all.
What I'm going to suggest is that we, in a moment, say thank you to our two speakers. If people want to stay behind and talk about these issues and how we're going to carry them forward, if you want to leave any contact details so that we can let you know what we're doing next, that would be great. But perhaps I can just say thank you to John and to Martha.